74,000 years ago, the human race came within a hair's width of total annihilation. Not from a war, not from a plague, not from some slow, creeping extinction no one saw coming. From a volcano. One single volcano, and here's the thing that should genuinely disturb you. You might be alive right now because of pure, stupid luck. Because a few thousand terrified people on a coastline in Africa managed to not die. That's the entire foundation of the human race. Let's talk about it. First, picture the world 74,000 years ago. Homo sapiens had been around for maybe 100,000 years at this point. We were barely a footnote. We were still figuring out stone tools, fire, how to not get eaten by things with bigger teeth than us. There were maybe a few 100,000 of us scattered across Africa. Small bands, fragile, nomadic. Every single day was a negotiation between survival and oblivion. We were not dominant. We were not thriving. We were hanging on by our fingernails at the edge of a very long drop. And then Toba erupted. Toba is a supervolcano. Present tense, it still exists. It's sitting right now under what is modern-day Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. But 74,000 years ago, it didn't just erupt. It detonated. The Toba eruption is the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. The largest. By an enormous margin. Scientists classify it as a VEI 8, the maximum score on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. For reference, Mount St. Helens in 1980 was a VEI 5. The difference between those two numbers is not 5 steps on a ladder. It's a factor of 1,000 in terms of raw ejected material. Toba threw roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma into the atmosphere. 2,800. That number slides off the brain until you frame it like this. It was enough ash to blanket the entire surface of Australia to a depth of 1.5 meters. Continuously. Wall to wall, the eruption lasted approximately 2 weeks. 2 weeks of non-stop, catastrophic explosion. The sound alone would have been audible across most of the planet. The ash fallout in South Asia was meters thick. Meters. And the sky? It went dark. Now here's where it gets genuinely dark. The eruption itself wasn't the thing that nearly killed us. What came after? That's the part that changed everything. When Toba exploded, it didn't just throw rock and debris skyward, it injected billions of tons of sulfur dioxide directly into the stratosphere. Up there, sulfur dioxide doesn't just dissipate, it converts into sulfate aerosols. Tiny reflective particles that spread across the entire planet within months, forming a global veil between the sun and the surface. The result was a volcanic winter. Global temperatures dropped. Conservative estimates put it at 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Other models go higher, up to 15 degrees in some regions. Even the low end of that range is catastrophic when it's sustained. And it was sustained. This wasn't a cold snap. This lasted years, possibly a decade. Maybe longer. The aerosols lingered in the stratosphere, blocking sunlight, cooling the surface, disrupting rainfall patterns, collapsing growing seasons. Forests died, grasslands contracted, food chains unraveled from the bottom upward. Every animal on the planet that depended on plant life, which is functionally all of them, suddenly faced a world that couldn't feed them. And humans? We were already fragile. We were already few. We were already one bad season from disappearing. Now we had 10 bad seasons, back to back, with no end in sight. Here's where the story stops being ancient history and starts being personal. When geneticists began mapping human DNA in the late 20th century, they found something strange. Something that genuinely unsettled them. Something that shouldn't have been there. Humans have extraordinarily low genetic diversity. Absurdly low compared to other great apes. Chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, they all carry far more genetic variation between individuals than we do. And that's deeply weird. Because we're a species spread across every continent, every climate, every environment on Earth. You'd expect more variation, not less. Unless at some point in our past, our population collapsed so severely that almost everyone died. And the survivors, a tiny founding group, rebuilt the species from scratch. That collapse is called a genetic bottleneck. The theory is called the Toba catastrophe theory, and the numbers it proposes are genuinely staggering. The eruption and the volcanic winter that followed may have reduced the global human population to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. Not 3 million, Not 300,000, 3,000. To 10,000 on the entire planet. Think about what that means. Not 3 million, not 300,000. A group small enough to fit inside a single football stadium, that's every human being on Earth at our lowest point. That's the entire founding population of a species that would eventually build the pyramids, split the atom, and walk on the moon. Every king who ever ruled. Every artist who ever created anything. Every person who ever loved or grieved or discovered something. Every person alive right now, all descended in a direct, unbroken line from that handful of survivors. But here's the question scientists are still fighting about. Did we survive because of luck, or because of something specific? Something we did, or somewhere we hid? The volcanic winter hit hardest in the northern hemisphere and across Asia, where the ash fallout was most severe. But the distribution of cooling wasn't uniform, and some regions of Africa, particularly along the southern coasts and equatorial zones, may have been relatively marginally just barely more survivable than everywhere else. There's archaeological evidence that backs this up. Stone tools and shellfish middens, ancient garbage dumps basically, found at sites like Pinnacle Point in South Africa, date to right around the Toba period. And what they show is people surviving on marine resources. Shellfish, sea creatures, food sources that weren't part of the collapsed terrestrial food chain. The ocean kept them alive. They ate what washed up. They stayed close to the water. They endured, probably without understanding even a fraction of what had happened, just waiting for the world to become less hostile. And slowly, agonizingly, it did. The sulfate aerosols settled out of the stratosphere. Sunlight returned. Plant life began its long, tentative comeback. And those few thousand people huddled along coastlines and river valleys, they started to recover too. They survived. They reproduced. They spread. And eventually, tens of thousands of years later, they populated the entire world. The bottleneck didn't just leave bones behind, it left fingerprints in our DNA that every single living human carries. Mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed exclusively through the maternal line, tells us that all living humans descend from a single ancestral population that existed around this time period. This is the concept popularly called mitochondrial Eve. Not one literal woman, a founding population, a genetic origin point so recent, so narrow, that all modern human lineages trace back through it. Y chromosome analysis shows the same pattern on the paternal side, the same collapse, the same time frame. What this means, and this is the part that should genuinely floor you, is that every person alive today is more closely related to every other person on Earth than most animal species are within their own isolated local populations. The genetic distance between a person from Norway and a person from Papua New Guinea is smaller than the distance between two chimpanzee troops living 5 kilometers apart in the same forest. We are, genetically speaking, a shockingly unified species. And we're unified because almost everyone else died. Now, here's the part that most people never hear about. The Toba catastrophe theory might be wrong. Not wrong about the eruption. That's not in dispute. Toba erupted. It was massive. The volcanic winter happened. That's established geology. What's contested is whether the eruption actually caused a human population collapse. In 2007, archaeologists working in southern India found something inconvenient. They found stone tools, human stone tools, in a layer of sediment below a thick deposit of Toba ash. And then, directly above that ash layer, more stone tools. Similar tools. Continuous habitation. The same population, apparently, living through the eruption on both sides of it. If Toba had driven humanity to the brink of extinction, you wouldn't expect that. You'd expect a long silence in the record. A gap. Nothing. Then, eventually, something different. Not seamless continuity. And there's additional evidence from East Africa suggesting uninterrupted human activity through the same period. Some researchers now argue the genetic bottleneck was real, but happened earlier, or was caused by something else entirely. Disease. A different climate event. Competitive pressure from other hominid species. And Toba just happened to coincide, close enough in geological time to seem connected. Others argue the bottleneck happened, the timing fits, and the Indian sites represent an isolated regional exception that doesn't undermine the broader pattern. The debate is genuinely, actively unresolved. Scientists are still fighting about this, the data is incomplete, the dating has margins of error, and the stakes of being wrong feel large in both directions. But here's what nobody disputes. At some point in the relatively recent past, the human species was reduced to a tiny founding population. The evidence is in our genes. It is written into every cell in your body right now. Something happened, TOBA, or something else, or some combination we haven't fully mapped, and the human race passed through a needle's eye. And the people who came out the other side carried something with them. Not just enough genetic variation to rebuild a species. Something harder to measure: flexibility, adaptability, the ability to survive catastrophic, civilization-ending disruption without a civilization to fall back on. That stubbornness might be the most important inheritance we got from those few thousand coastline survivors. Not their tools, not their specific culture, the raw, irrational refusal to stop. So let's go back to the beginning. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted with a force that hadn't been seen on this planet in 2 million years. It may or may not have directly caused the near extinction of the human species. Smart people with good evidence are still arguing about it. But here's what we know. At some point, the entire future of the human race balanced on a knife's edge. Every breakthrough, every civilization, every discovery, every piece of art and science and music and heartbreak, all of it was contingent on a few thousand terrified people surviving long enough to have children. You are the result of that survival. The fact that you exist right now is, statistically speaking, an absolute miracle. And somewhere under Lake Toba, the magma that almost ended us is still there, still waiting. If this messed with your head even a little, that's the idea. Subscribe and stick around, because we're just getting started with the genuinely unbelievable, deeply weird history of what it meant to be human. The next one might break your brain even worse.